The forest was never quiet at night. The wind moved through the trees like a voice trying to speak, a language older than any human tongue. Beneath the ancient oaks, shadows stretched and twisted as though alive, and at the heart of it all, a figure sat alone by a dying fire. His name was Kael, though no one had spoken it in centuries. Once he had been feared, a demon born from human sorrow, the shape of despair itself. But now his horns were dull, his claws chipped, and his once burning eyes only held a dim red glow. He watched the fire fade to embers, remembering the warmth of a world that had forgotten him. Kael had not always lived in the forest. Long ago, he had walked among men, unseen yet ever near, feeding on their grief and leaving behind only whispers in the dark. He had been called the mourner's shadow, for wherever a soul wept, Kael lingered close. But time changed even for monsters. The world grew louder, machines, cities, noise and sadness took new forms that no longer needed demons to carry it. Humans made their own grief now, faster than he could consume it. He became useless, unwanted, and forgotten. The forest had become his last refuge, a place where no one came unless they were lost. The trees accepted him in their own way. They did not fear or judge, only listened. He would sit for hours beside the river, watching the reflection of his face ripple across the water, as if even his image were trying to escape him. At times he spoke to the birds, though they rarely answered. Still, their silence was kinder than the screams he used to hear. For the first time in his long existence, Kael understood what it meant to be lonely. There were nights when the forest tested him, when the moonlight revealed shapes from his past. Faces of those he had haunted would drift among the mist, their eyes hollow, their mouths whispering his name. He would reach out, hoping for forgiveness, but the visions always faded. The guilt was endless. Once he believed he was a part of sorrow, but now he realized he had only deepened it. He had not been born evil. He had been made that way by the world's pain. And now he was its last echo, fading into silence. As dawn crept through the branches, Kael rose slowly, his wings folding against his back. The light stung, though it no longer burned. He looked toward the edge of the forest, where the trees grew thinner and the scent of humans drifted faintly in the air. Something had changed beyond those woods, something that stirred a feeling he thought long dead. It was faint but real, the presence of grief, pure and human. Someone was crying out there, alone. Kael hesitated. He had sworn never to return to their world. Yet that single sound called to him like a heartbeat. Against the weight of centuries, he began to walk toward it. The sound led Kael through the thick forest, past roots that curled like claws and mist that clung to his wings. The closer he came, the clearer the voice became, a woman's cry, soft but sharp, soaked in pain. It had been lifetimes since Kael had heard a human voice that wasn't filled with anger or fear. He paused at the tree line, where moonlight spilled across a small clearing. There, beside a broken cart and a fallen horse, a young woman knelt in the dirt. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against another man's chest, a man lifeless and pale. Kael felt the pull of her sorrow pierce through him. Once, such pain would have been his feast. Now it only made his heart ache. He stayed hidden among the trees, watching. The woman's tears fell onto the man's face, and her voice cracked as she begged him to wake. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave me alone here." Kael's claws dug into the bark. He had seen this grief so deep it could drown a soul. But this was different. Her sadness wasn't dark or bitter. It was pure, raw, unshielded. It reminded him of what sorrow used to mean before demons turned it into power. He wanted to look away but couldn't. Her pain held him there, still and silent, as though she had unknowingly summoned him. The wind shifted and the woman froze. She turned her head toward the trees, sensing his presence. "Who's there?" she whispered. Her eyes, red from crying, searched the shadows. Kael stepped back, heart pounding in a rhythm he'd forgotten he possessed. He could vanish, melt into the mist, and she would never know he had come. But something stronger than fear rooted him in place, a memory, faint and almost human. Long ago, before the fire and the curses, he had been a guardian spirit, not a monster. For a moment he wondered if he could still be one. Her voice came again, trembling. "If anyone's there, please help me." That plea broke what was left of his restraint. Kael stepped into the moonlight, the forest sighing behind him. The woman gasped, stumbling backward. His form was terrible to look upon, horns black as ash, eyes dimly glowing, wings torn and weathered. He raised a clawed hand, not in threat, but in peace. "I will not harm you," he said quietly, his voice deep and rough like stones grinding together. The woman's breath came fast, but she didn't run. She only stared, her tears catching the light. "What are you?" she whispered. Kael looked down, unsure how to answer. No one had asked him that in ages. "Once," he said slowly, "I was called many things. None of them are kind." She looked at him, eyes wide but not hateful. He could see fear, yes, but also something else, desperation, the kind that leaves no room for judgment. She turned toward the man on the ground. "Can you save him?" The question hit Kael like a blade. His heart sank. "No," he said softly. "His soul has already gone beyond my reach." Her face broke again and she fell forward, sobbing into her hands. Kael knelt beside her, unsure what to do. He had taken sorrow before, stolen it, fed on it, but to comfort it? That was something he'd never learned. Still, he felt the need to try. He reached out, his clawed fingers hovering above her shoulder, afraid to touch. "He does not suffer," Kael murmured. "The pain is only yours now." She lifted her face, streaked with dirt and tears. "Then take it," she said. "If you're what I think you are, take it away. Please." Her voice broke like glass. Kael's breath caught. He could take her grief, absorb it, ease her pain, but doing so meant tasting sorrow again, risking what he had buried. Slowly he nodded, closing his eyes. "Forgive me," he whispered and placed his hand upon her heart. The forest fell silent. The woman gasped as warmth spread through her chest, and Kael felt the rush of her pain flood into him. It was too bright, human, and alive. It burned through his veins, bringing with it memories not his own. Laughter, love, the scent of rain. For the first time in centuries, Kael remembered what it was like to feel human sorrow, not as power, but as truth. When he opened his eyes, she had fallen asleep beside the man she loved, her face calm. Kael rose, trembling. The fire inside him flickered weakly. He had done what she asked, but something had changed. The grief he absorbed did not fade. It stayed, pulsing quietly as though the woman's heart still beat within his own. Kael stood over the sleeping woman as dawn crept through the trees, painting gold across her face. Her breathing was slow, peaceful. He had taken her sorrow as she wished, but the grief did not vanish as it once did. It lingered, settling deep inside him like a heartbeat that wasn't his. The man beside her was still and cold, his eyes closed forever. Kael knew the woman would wake to that truth soon. He wanted to stay to watch over her, but his presence was a curse. Wherever he remained, shadows followed. Still, something inside him refused to move. He felt tied to her, as though her pain had bound them together in ways he couldn't explain. The morning light reached through the trees, touching Kael's skin. It didn't burn him anymore. That frightened him more than fire ever could. For a moment, he wondered if the grief he had taken was changing him. Demons were not meant to carry human pain without devouring it. Yet this sorrow lived in him not as power, but as warmth. He could feel her memories inside him. The sound of the man's laughter, the smell of fresh bread, the softness of a shared blanket on winter nights. Simple, mortal things. Things he had never known. They hurt, but the pain was beautiful. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a heartbeat, she looked at him and smiled faintly, unaware of where she was. Then her gaze fell on the man beside her, and everything inside her broke again. She clutched his hand and wept silently, her shoulders trembling. Kael stayed still, unsure if his presence would comfort or terrify. Finally she looked up. "You're still here?" she whispered. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I took what you asked me to," he said. "And it hasn't left me." Her expression softened, her grief mixing with confusion. "Then you feel it too," she said quietly. "My loss." Kael nodded, unable to find words. She looked at the forest around them as if seeing it for the first time. "I have nowhere to go," she murmured. "He was all I had." Her voice trembled, but there was no anger, only emptiness. Kael felt something shift within him, a strange ache that had nothing to do with her sorrow. "Then stay," he said before he could stop himself. The words sounded wrong coming from his mouth, too gentle for a creature like him. She turned toward him, uncertain. "Stay? With you?" He lowered his head, ashamed. "The forest will keep you safe. I can make sure no harm comes." She studied him, and though fear flickered in her eyes, so did gratitude. "All right," she said softly. "Just for now." Days passed. The woman whose name he learned was Lira made a small camp near the river. Kael watched from a distance, helping in quiet ways, gathering fallen branches, keeping wolves away, repairing what she broke. She began to speak to him little by little. She asked questions he struggled to answer about what he was, where he came from, and why he lingered here. "Because I have nowhere else," he told her one night. "And because I think I was meant to find you." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they didn't fall. "Then maybe," she whispered, "we were both meant to be lost together." Kael looked at her, and for the first time in centuries, the silence between two souls didn't feel empty, it felt alive. The forest had grown gentler since Lira came. Where once Kael heard only whispers of the dead, now there was laughter, soft, uncertain, but real. Lira spoke often, mostly to fill the quiet, and Kael listened. She told him about the village she had fled, the sickness that had taken her husband, and the night she had tried to escape her own grief. Her words were fragile, like glass, but each one carried warmth. Kael never told her that he could feel her sorrow still alive inside him, beating against his ribs. It was the only part of her world he understood. He wondered if she could sense that connection too, if she knew that when she cried in her sleep, his chest ached as though her tears fell through him. One evening, as rain fell softly, Lira built a small fire and invited Kael to sit near it. He hesitated at first. Demons were creatures of shadow, not flame, but something in her gaze drew him forward. The light flickered against his dark skin, revealing scars older than she could imagine. She didn't flinch. Instead, she handed him a small piece of bread, slightly burned at the edges. "You should eat," she said. Kael looked at it uncertainly. "I do not need food." She smiled faintly. "Then do it because I do." Slowly, awkwardly, he took it. The taste was nothing to him, yet somehow it felt like a sacred act, a bridge between what he was and what he had once dreamed of being. That night, Kael asked the question he had long buried. "Do you fear me?" he said, his voice low, almost human. Lira glanced up from the fire. "At first," she admitted. "But now, I don't think I do." She looked into the flames, her face calm. "You remind me of my grief. It's ugly, but it's mine. And I can't fear what I already live with." Her words struck deep, cutting through the silence inside him. He realized then that fear and sorrow were cousins, both born from love. And maybe, somewhere beneath the ashes of his curse, a part of him still remembered how to love. Not like humans did, but in his own broken way. Days turned into weeks. The forest changed with them. Flowers bloomed where Kael walked, faint and ghostly, as if his presence was no longer poison but something gentler. He tried not to notice. He did not want to hope. But hope came anyway, in Lira's laughter, in the warmth of firelight on his claws, in the way she began to hum old songs to the night. Sometimes when she sang, Kael would close his eyes and imagine a world where demons were not born from pain. A world where he could stand beside her without the weight of what he was. But dreams, he knew, were dangerous things for creatures like him. They gave light, and light burned. One morning, Lira found Kael by the river, his reflection trembling in the water. "You look sad," she said softly. He didn't answer. "Kael," she continued, "you saved me when you took my pain. But maybe you didn't have to carry it forever." He looked at her, confused. "How can I let go of something that is not mine?" She stepped closer, touching his arm for the first time. "By forgiving yourself." The words felt impossible, yet something in her voice made him believe they could be true. For the first time in 1,000 years, Kael felt something inside him begin to loosen, something dark, heavy, and long-held. The forest wind moved through the trees, and for a single heartbeat, he thought he heard it whisper his name, not in fear, but in peace. The days grew longer, and Kael began to change in ways he couldn't explain. His wings no longer dragged through the dirt. They carried faint light between the trees when the sun set. He didn't mean for it to happen, it simply did, as though the forest itself was healing him. But with each flicker of light came pain too. Demons were not made to hold beauty. The human sorrow he had taken from Lira still pulsed within him, but now it felt alive. It whispered in dreams, showed him flashes of a life he had never lived in, a house by a lake, laughter shared over simple meals, the feeling of another's hand resting in his. He would wake from those dreams trembling, the ache inside unbearable. It was not his life, but it had become part of him. Lira noticed the change. "You're different," she said one morning as they gathered water. "Your eyes don't glow like before." Kael turned away, ashamed. "It is fading," he murmured. "The fire that made me." She frowned. "Is that bad?" He hesitated. "It means I am becoming something I don't understand. And that frightens me." She smiled faintly. "You sound almost human when you say that." Her words stung and soothed all at once. He wanted to tell her the truth, that humanity was both his curse and his desire. To feel as they did was to suffer endlessly, but to never feel at all was far worse. One night, as Lira sang by the fire, Kael listened with eyes closed. Her voice was quiet, broken at the edges, yet beautiful in its imperfection. He didn't understand the words, but the feeling behind them sank deep into him. When the song ended, she looked at him shyly. "It was his favorite," she said. "He used to say I sang like rain." Kael wanted to tell her she still did, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he whispered, "He was fortunate." The way she smiled, then soft, fragile, made his chest ache. He realized he no longer wanted her sorrow to leave him. It was the only thing that made him feel real. But peace in the forest never lasted long. That night, Kael felt a tremor beneath the earth, faint but familiar. He rose quickly, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Lira asked, startled. "A calling," he said, voice darkening. Old voices waking. Far away beyond the woods, a shadow moved, a stirring of something ancient, older even than Kael. It whispered his true name, the one he had buried when he fled the world of men. Lira saw the fear in his face and stepped closer. "Kael, what's wrong?" He didn't answer. The wind carried the scent of ash and salt, the smell of a world that remembered demons. Something was coming, and it was coming for him. He turned to Lira, his voice trembling. "You must leave the forest. Now." She shook her head. "No. I won't." "You don't understand," he said, stepping back. "There are others like me, creatures of sorrow. They will sense what I have done. They will smell the human grief inside me and come to take it back." Lira's face went pale. "Then I'll stay," she said quietly. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me." Kael's eyes flared red for the first time in weeks. "You would die for a demon?" he whispered. She looked at him with steady eyes. "No," she said softly. "I'd live for one." The forest fell silent, and Kael realized he was no longer afraid of the light. The forest grew uneasy after that night. The air felt heavier, the silence sharper. Even the river seemed to move more slowly, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Kael could sense them now, the others, demons like him, drawn by the pulse of human grief that lingered in his heart. They were hungry things, unfeeling and cruel, shaped by centuries of despair. He had once walked among them, fed beside them, and laughed at humanity's pain. But now the thought of them made his blood run cold. Lira noticed his unease. "They're close, aren't they?" she whispered. Kael nodded. "They do not forgive betrayal." She frowned. "You didn't betray them. You changed." He looked away. "To them that is worse." That evening he stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the horizon burn orange with sunset. "You should run," he said quietly. "Go north, find the villages beyond the marsh. They won't follow that far." Lira crossed her arms. "You keep saying that, but you know I won't leave." Kael turned to her, frustration breaking through his calm. "Why stay for a monster who can't even save you?" She stepped closer, eyes steady. "Because you already did." Her words stopped him cold. For a long time neither spoke. Only the trees whispered between them, their leaves trembling with the wind. As darkness fell, Kael began to prepare. He gathered old stones, drew circles in the dirt, whispered forgotten words that burned his throat. Lira watched silently. "You're going to fight them," she said. It wasn't a question. Kael didn't answer at first. "They won't stop," he said finally. "If they find me, they'll destroy everything here and you with it." "Then we'll face them together," she said. He shook his head. "Lira, I was born from sorrow. They're my kin. They know no mercy. You can't fight shadows." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then let me be your light." For a moment, Kael almost smiled. Her courage was madness, but it was beautiful madness. When night deepened, the forest began to hum. The wind died. The stars disappeared behind a veil of darkness. Kael felt them before he saw them, the other demons slipping through the trees like smoke, eyes glowing faintly red. There were 3, maybe 4. Their forms were twisted, their faces sharp and hollow. One spoke, its voice a hiss. "You took what is ours, Kael." He straightened, wings unfolding. "It was never yours. Human sorrow belongs to the heart that bears it." The creature laughed, a sound like bone cracking. "You speak like one of them now. How pathetic." Behind him, Lira stood frozen, fear flashing in her eyes. Kael's body moved on instinct, stepping between her and the shadows. "Leave her," he growled. "She is not yours to touch." The air erupted in motion. Shadows lunged, claws slicing through the light. Kael struck back, his wings flaring like dark fire. The ground trembled beneath them. Lira could only watch as the night became a blur of movement and sound, roaring, breaking, burning. Kael fought with everything he had, but there were too many. One demon's claw tore across his side, and black blood spilled into the dirt. He fell to his knees, panting. The leader stepped forward, sneering. "You have forgotten what you are," it said. Kael lifted his head, eyes burning faintly gold now instead of red. "No," he whispered. "I've remembered." With the last of his strength, he struck, light bursting from his chest, searing the shadows into smoke. When the forest fell quiet again, only Kael and Lira remained. He collapsed, trembling, the glow fading from his eyes. Lira rushed to Kael's side, her heart pounding as she knelt beside him. His skin was cold, his breath shallow. The forest around them was still, heavy with the scent of burnt earth and fading shadows. "Kael," she whispered, shaking him gently. His eyes flickered open dimly but alive. "They're gone," he murmured. "For now." She pressed a cloth to his wound, tears blurring her vision. "You're hurt," she said. He smiled faintly, though blood stained his lips. "It's nothing I haven't felt before." But it wasn't true. This pain was different. It came not from battle, but from what he had become. His body rejected the light he had unleashed. It wasn't meant for a demon's flesh. Still he said nothing. He didn't want her to see his fear. For days, Lira tended to him in silence. She gathered herbs, washed his wounds, whispered stories to keep him awake. Kael watched her through half-lidded eyes, marveling at the gentleness of her hands. No one had ever touched him without fear or hatred before. Sometimes he wished she wouldn't because every kindness hurt more than claws ever could. One night, as she replaced his bandages, he spoke softly. "You should have run." She looked at him, tired but calm. "If I had, you'd be dead." He tried to smile. "Demons don't die easily." She shook her head. "Maybe not. But whatever you are, you bleed like I do." Her words sank into him, deeper than any wound. As Kael healed, something strange began to happen. The forest brightened not just with light, but with life. Flowers bloomed where his blood had fallen, their petals the color of dusk. Birds returned, singing soft songs that Lira swore she hadn't heard in years. Even the air seemed warmer. Kael could feel the change too. The shadows that once clung to him began to dissolve, replaced by a warmth that frightened him more than darkness ever had. "It's not natural," he muttered. Lira smiled. "Maybe it's mercy." He looked at her sharply. "Mercy is for the living." "Then start living," she said. The words left him silent. He realized he didn't know how. One evening, as the sky turned violet, Kael stood by the river again. His reflection rippled across the water, softer now, less monstrous, almost human. He could see faint traces of gold in his eyes, where red once burned. He reached down, touching the surface. "I don't know what I am anymore," he whispered. Lira stepped beside him. "You're Kael," she said simply. "That's enough." He looked at her, wanting to believe it. But deep down he knew the truth. Light always demanded a price. What he had done to destroy his kin had broken something inside him. His strength was fading, his wings felt heavy, and the warmth growing within him was both a gift and curse. He could no longer return to what he was, nor fully become what he wished to be. That night, as Lira slept by the fire, Kael sat awake watching the stars. He thought of the other demons, of the endless ages of hunger and silence, and of how it had all led him here to a single human heart. He wondered if he had truly saved her, or only delayed the pain waiting beyond the forest. Yet when he looked at her sleeping face, peace washed over him. For the first time he did not feel like a creature of sorrow. He felt forgiven. And though his body trembled with weakness, his soul, something he thought long lost, stirred quietly within him. The night whispered around him, not with fear this time, but with the gentle rhythm of hope. The mornings grew colder as the forest entered its quiet season. Mist rolled over the ground like a soft blanket, and the trees shed their leaves in golden waves. Kael felt it in his bones, the slowing, the fading. His body no longer healed as it once did. The wounds from the battle remained dark and sore, as though the light he had used against the demons was still burning him from within. Yet he said nothing to Lira. He didn't want her sorrow to return. Each day he pretended to be stronger, forcing a smile when she asked how he felt. "Better," he would say. But at night, when she slept, he could feel the truth clawing at him. The light that had saved her was killing him slowly. Lira began to notice, even though he tried to hide it. She saw the way he winced when he moved, how he leaned against the trees for support. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she reached for his hand. "Kael," she said softly, "you're in pain." He looked at her, eyes dim. "Pain is a part of what I am." "No," she whispered. "It's what you were. You're more than that now." He wanted to believe her, but he could feel the darkness deep inside him fighting, twisting, trying to take back control. "If I let it go," he murmured, "I don't know what will be left." She squeezed his hand gently. "Then we'll find out together." For the first time he didn't pull away. The forest seemed to listen to their silence. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that echoed through the trees. Kael lifted his head, his senses sharp. "Something stirs again," he said. "The forest feels restless." Lira frowned. "More demons?" He shook his head. "No. Something older." The thought made him uneasy. The light within him, the strange power that had burned his kin, was drawing attention. Creatures of shadow were not the only ones who sensed it. There were older forces in the world, spirits of balance, guardians of what was lost and broken. He feared they would come soon, not as enemies but as judges. He had tampered with something sacred, and the world would not ignore it. Later that night, Lira woke to find Kael gone. Panic shot through her, and she followed the faint glow she saw between the trees. She found him kneeling by the river, his wings spread, his body trembling. "Kael," she cried, running to him. He turned slowly, his face pale and tired. "It's calling me," he said weakly. "The light doesn't belong to me. It wants to return." She shook her head, tears falling. "No, you can't. You'll die." He smiled sadly. "Lira, I already am." His voice was calm, as if accepting something inevitable. The light around him pulsed gently, like a heartbeat fading in the dark. He looked up at her, his eyes soft. "You taught me what it means to feel. Don't grieve for what was never meant to last." Lira fell to her knees beside him, clutching his arm. "Then don't leave me," she whispered. "Please." Her tears fell onto his hands, glowing faintly where they touched. Kael closed his eyes, his heart breaking at the sound of her voice. "I wish I could stay," he said. But the light wasn't a gift. It was a chance to be something better, even for a moment. He reached up, brushing her hair from her face. "You gave me that." The forest wind rose around them, carrying the scent of rain. Lira pressed her forehead against his chest, her sobs quiet and broken. Kael wrapped his wings around her, holding her close. In that moment, the forest seemed to breathe with them, alive, mourning, and still. Kael didn't die that night. When dawn came, the light that had threatened to consume him dimmed to a quiet glow within his chest, like a coal refusing to fade. Lira stayed beside him, her hand never leaving his. She didn't know if her tears had stopped the light from taking him or if something greater had intervened. All she knew was that he was breathing, and that was enough. Kael opened his eyes slowly, confusion flickering through them. "I'm still here," he whispered, surprised. Lira smiled through tears. "Yes, you are." He frowned slightly. "But the light feels different. Quieter." She touched his face gently. "Maybe it decided you were worth keeping." He gave a weak laugh. "I doubt that." "Then doubt less," she said softly. The days that followed were peaceful, almost fragile in their calm. Kael regained some strength, though he moved slower now. His wings no longer shone or shadowed. They were simply there, tired and worn, like old leaves clinging to a branch. Lira spent her mornings tending to the riverbank, planting herbs and flowers she found along the paths. Kael often watched her in silence, learning something from the way she worked, her patience, her care, her quiet strength. He found himself wanting to protect that light, not because it made her different, but because it made her human. It was a light demons were never meant to see, yet he couldn't look away. Every smile she gave him felt like a small forgiveness. But peace was never meant to last. One afternoon, as they gathered water, a strange sound echoed through the trees, a low hum, deep and mournful. Kael froze. "That isn't a demon's voice," he said quietly. The air thickened, vibrating with unseen power. The trees bent slightly, their leaves trembling as though something ancient had awakened beneath the soil. Lira stepped closer to him. "What is it?" she whispered. "The forest," Kael said. "It's alive in ways we can't see. It knows what I've done. It knows I've changed what should not be changed." His eyes darkened. "And it remembers." The sound grew louder, and the river beside them began to glow faintly, its surface shimmering like glass. From the light of the water rose shapes tall, slender, and faceless. Spirits, old as the roots themselves, wrapped in mist and memory. Lira gasped, clutching Kael's arm. He bowed his head instinctively. "Forest keepers," he murmured. "They guard the balance of life and sorrow." One of the spirits stepped forward, its voice echoing like wine through hollow wood. "Kael of the morning flame," it said. "You have stolen the pain of a mortal heart and turned it into light. Such things cannot remain unjudged." Kael's wings drooped. "I did not seek to steal it," he said, "only to ease her suffering." The spirit tilted its head. "You took what must be lived. You changed her fate." Lira stepped forward, trembling but defiant. "He saved me," she said. "He gave me hope." The spirits turned to her, their glow softening. "And what have you given him in return?" Kael looked at Lira, his heart tightening. He wanted to tell them she had given him everything: life, meaning, forgiveness, but the words caught in his throat. Lira reached for his hand. "I gave him love," she said simply. The forest fell silent. Even the river stopped moving for a moment, as though the world itself was listening. The spirit closest to them tilted its head again, and when it spoke, its tone had changed. "Then your fates are bound," it said. "The sorrow he took will remain within him until his final breath. You may live, but you will carry his pain as your own." Lyra's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. "Then so be it." Kael turned to her in shock. "Lira, no." But it was too late. The spirits raised their hands, and a soft light enveloped them both, neither punishment nor mercy, but something between. When it faded, the spirits were gone, and the forest was silent once more. When the spirits vanished, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air was still, heavy with what had just been spoken. Lira and Kael stood by the river, the light fading from their skin. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lira reached for his hand again. "It's done," she whispered. Kael stared at her, disbelief in his eyes. "You don't understand what they've done. You've taken part of my curse." She shook her head gently. "Then it's ours now." He pulled away, trembling. "You shouldn't have agreed. You've tied yourself to me, to my pain. Every sorrow I bear will become yours." She met his gaze, steady and calm. "I've lived through worse pain, Kael, but I've never lived through love. If this is the cost, I accept it." Kael turned away, his wings folding tight against his back. He could feel her sorrow now, faint but real, echoing through him like a second heartbeat. The forest seemed to hum around them, accepting this new bond. "Love is not meant for demons," he said softly. Lira stepped closer. "Then maybe love isn't meant for rules." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, saw himself reflected in her eyes, not as a monster, but as a man who could still choose. "You will regret this," he whispered. "Maybe," she said, smiling sadly, "but not today." Days passed, and the bond between them deepened. Sometimes, Kael would feel waves of emotion that weren't his. Lyra's quiet memories of her husband, her fears, her small joys when the morning light broke through the trees. At other times, she would feel the weight of centuries, the ache of loneliness, the echo of countless lost souls he had once consumed. It should have broken them both, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it made them understand each other without words. When Kael grew restless at night, Lira would hum softly, and the chaos inside him would ease. When Lyra's grief returned, Kael would sit beside her, silent, steady, a shadow that no longer frightened her. One evening, Lira caught him staring at the horizon. "You're thinking of leaving," she said quietly. Kael didn't deny it. "The balance has been restored for now. But the world beyond these woods still remembers what I am." She frowned. "Then let it remember wrongly." He shook his head. "No. The light inside me will fade soon, and when it does, the darkness will return. I won't risk hurting you." She stood, anger flickering in her eyes. "After everything we've been through, you still think I'd let you go alone?" He looked at her, sorrow in his gaze. "You can't follow where I'm meant to end." She crossed her arms, her voice trembling. "Then I'll wait where you began." The next morning, Kael rose before dawn. Lira was still asleep, her face peaceful in the pale light. He watched her for a long time, memorizing the shape of her breath, the warmth in her presence. Quietly, he placed his hand over her heart. "You gave me more than mercy," he whispered. "You gave me a reason." Then he turned and walked into the mist, his figure fading among the trees. When Lira woke, the camp was empty except for a single feather, black and streaked with gold. She held it close, tears falling freely, but she did not call out. She knew where he had gone, to the edge of the forest, where demons go to die. The edge of the forest was a place few dared to walk. The air there was thin and cold, as if the earth itself held its breath. The trees stopped growing, their roots twisting toward the barren ground beyond. Kael stood there for hours, staring at the endless gray horizon. He could feel the last of his strength slipping away, his body trembling with exhaustion. The light within him had grown faint, flickering like a dying candle. He had come here to let it fade quietly, away from the living, away from Lira. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the warmth of her hands, the sound of her voice. The memory was both comforting and tormenting. "You should forget me," he whispered to the wind, but the forest carried her name back to him instead. He knelt in the dirt, wings trailing beside him. For centuries, he had believed demons could not die, only vanish into shadow until called again. But the light had changed him, made him mortal in ways he couldn't explain. He felt fear, real fear, not of death, but of being forgotten. The thought made his chest ache. "Maybe this is what it means to live," he murmured, his voice barely audible. The sky above was heavy with clouds, the sun a pale ghost behind them. Kael closed his eyes and let the silence sink into him. The forest behind whispered softly, as if mourning already. Somewhere far away, he thought he heard the faint echo of footsteps, but it could have been memory playing tricks. Back at the river, Lira could not rest. She had tried to tell herself he was gone, that his choice had been made, but her heart would not accept it. Every time the wind stirred, she felt him near. She remembered the promise he hadn't spoken, the one she had read in his eyes. Love does not end with distance. So she gathered her things, took the black and gold feather, and followed the trail he had left behind. It was faint, but the forest seemed to guide her, bending its paths toward the place she needed to go. As she walked, memories flooded her. The first time she saw him, the nights by the fire, the way he had said her name like it mattered. She realized then that her sorrow was no longer a weight, it was a map, leading her back to him. When she reached the forest's edge, she saw him. Kael was kneeling, wings spread wide, his body faintly glowing with the last breath of light. "Kael," she cried, running to him. His head lifted slowly, eyes half closed. "You shouldn't be here." She fell to her knees beside him, clutching his shoulders. "You said I was part of this now. Then I will go where you go." He smiled weakly. "Lira, it's too late." "No," she said, tears falling. "It's only too late if you stop fighting." He laughed softly. "You've always believed in things that shouldn't be possible." She held his face in her hands. "Then believe in me." Her words trembled, but her voice did not break. Kael looked into her eyes, and something inside him stirred. The faint light in his chest flared, answering her heart's call. It hurt more than any wound, but it also felt right. The world blurred around them, colors fading into gold and shadow. "If I stay," he whispered, "I'll never be what I was. I'll never be what you deserve." Lira pressed her forehead to his. "Then be what you are. Be Kael." The light burst outward, swallowing the gray. The trees shuddered as warmth spread through the earth. For a heartbeat, there was no demon, no curse, only two souls holding on to what little time they had left. And the forest, ever watchful, wept for them both. The light faded slowly, leaving the air warm and trembling. When Kael opened his eyes again, the gray horizon was gone. The forest had returned alive, green, whispering softly as if it had been reborn. He looked down and saw Lira beside him, her head resting against his chest. For a moment, panic gripped him. "Lira?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Her eyes fluttered open, soft and clear. "You're still here?" she said weakly. He nodded, relief flooding through him. "And you?" he breathed. "You found me again." She smiled faintly. "You're easy to find. The forest always points toward sorrow." He laughed quietly, though his chest ached with pain. "Then it's cruel of it to guide you here." No, she said, sitting up slowly. It's merciful. It gave me back what I wasn't ready to lose. Kael tried to stand, but his strength had nearly gone. The wings on his back shimmered faintly before folding tight, their glow dulling to a soft gray. He felt different, not demon, not man, something caught in between. The light, he said, touching his chest. It's gone. Lira shook her head gently. No, it's just quieter now. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. It's still there, but it's not meant to burn anymore. It's meant to live. Her words settled deep within him, anchoring him to the moment. For the first time since he could remember, Kael didn't feel cursed or hunted. He felt present. The air around them was still, carrying only the faint hum of the forest's breath. Days turned into weeks as they made their home near the forest's edge. Kael built a small shelter of stone and wood, while Lira gathered herbs, tending to the garden that grew brighter each day. The forest no longer feared him. Birds returned to their branches, deer wandered close, and even the river sang softer when he was near. Kael would sometimes sit beside the fire at dusk, his gaze lost in the glow. Lira would join him, handing him tea or just resting her head on his shoulder. "You're quiet tonight," she would say, and he'd smile, answering simply, "I'm listening." He often thought of what the spirits had said, that balance required sorrow. Perhaps they were right. But now his sorrow had a purpose. It reminded him that he could still feel, still care, still love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Kael turned to Lira. "Do you ever think about leaving the forest?" he asked. She looked up, thoughtful. "Sometimes. But then I remember that this place gave me you." He hesitated. "You don't miss your old life?" She smiled gently. "I do. But I don't belong to it anymore. Grief doesn't disappear, it changes shape. You're part of that change." Her words struck something deep in him. He realized she had done what even the spirits couldn't. She had made peace with her pain. He reached for her hand, their fingers interlacing. "Then maybe this is what redemption looks like," he said softly. "Not erasing what's broken, but learning to live beside it." Lira leaned against him, her voice a whisper. "Then we've both been redeemed." That night, Kael dreamed for the first time in centuries. In his dream, he stood by the same river where he had once knelt in despair, but this time the water was clear and calm. He saw reflections not of demons or flames, but of faces, human and kind. Among them, Lira smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. When he woke, dawn had begun to break, painting the world in gold. He turned to find Lira already awake, watching the sunrise. "It's beautiful," she said. Kael nodded. "It is." He paused, his voice soft. "Thank you for finding me." She turned to him and smiled. "You were never lost. Just waiting to be seen." And as the light filled the forest once more, Kael realized that the place where light once lived had never truly left him, it had only been waiting for his heart to open. Seasons began to change again. The air grew cooler, the leaves deepened into gold, and the forest hummed with the slow rhythm of life preparing for rest. Kael and Lira had grown used to quiet days and soft nights, their lives no longer ruled by fear or loss. Yet in that peace, Kael began to feel something stir inside him, a faint hum beneath his skin, familiar and distant, like an echo from another lifetime. He tried to ignore it at first, but as the days passed, it grew stronger. One morning, while he gathered firewood, the sound deepened into a whisper. It wasn't a voice, not truly, but it carried words all the same. "You're not done." He froze, staring into the trees. "I've given enough," he said softly. The wind moved through the branches in answer, bending the light until it shimmered. He closed his eyes, his heart heavy. He had known peace would never last forever. That evening he didn't speak much. Lira noticed, of course she always did. "You're quiet," she said, setting a bowl of stew in front of him. He smiled faintly. "You say that often." "Because it's true," she replied, sitting beside him. He looked into the fire, unsure how to tell her what he felt. "There's something calling me, he said finally. Something I thought I left behind. Her expression softened, though fear flickered in her eyes. The darkness. He shook his head. No. Something older. The light, perhaps. It feels unfinished. Lira reached for his hand. Then ignore it. Stay here with me. He wanted to say yes, to promise her he would never leave again, but the forest was listening, and it did not forgive silence. That night, Kael dreamt again. But this dream was not gentle. He stood at the center of a burning grove, his wings spread wide, half gold and half black. The sky above him cracked open with light, and from it descended a shape, a being made entirely of radiance, neither kind nor cruel, only vast. It spoke without words, its voice both inside and around him. The balance remains incomplete. Kael bowed his head. What more must I give? The light pulsed. The flame you carry does not belong to you. It must return. He felt a deep ache in his chest, the faint glow within him answering. And if I let it go, you will fade. Kael opened his eyes. And if I keep it, the world will dim. He woke in a cold sweat, the echo of that voice still burning through his mind. He found Lira awake, sitting by the doorway, wrapped in her shawl. She turned as he approached, reading his face before he spoke. You're leaving again, she said quietly. He nodded. If I stay, the forest will pay the price. The light will spread too far, it wasn't meant for one being. Lira stood trembling. Then let me come with you. No, he said gently. This isn't a journey of flesh. It's one of letting go. Her eyes filled with tears. Kael, every time you leave, I lose a part of myself. He stepped closer, cupping her face. And every time you find more of who you are. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. You gave me your sorrow once. Now I must give back the light. Before dawn, he stood at the edge of the river where it all began. The water shimmered faintly as if waiting. Lira watched from a distance, her hands clasped to her heart. Kael looked toward the rising sun, the first light breaking through the mist. If I am to fade, he said softly, let it be in beauty. He spread his wings one final time, gold and gray catching the morning light. The forest whispered, wind moving through every leaf, every root. Goodbye, Lira, he murmured. She whispered back, you'll never truly leave. And when the first ray of sun touched his chest, Kael closed his eyes. The light rose from him like breath, gentle and golden, drifting upward until the forest glowed with quiet morning. When it was gone, the world was still. When the light vanished, silence filled the forest. The air hung heavy, still trembling from the echo of Kael's final breath. The trees seemed to bow, their branches leaning toward the river as if mourning something they could not name. Lira stood where he had been moments ago, the mist curling around her feet. The world felt emptier, quieter. She waited for the whisper of his wings, for the warmth of his voice, but there was nothing. Only the soft rush of water, carrying fragments of gold downstream. Her knees weakened and she sank to the earth, clutching the feathers she still kept. You said you'd never leave, she whispered. Her voice cracked, breaking the silence. The forest didn't answer, but a gentle wind brushed her cheek, warm as a sigh. She closed her eyes and wept, letting the grief come freely this time. Days passed before she could bring herself to move again. The forest, once vibrant and alive, felt hollow now. Birds sang less often, and the river's song was softer, slower. Yet despite the stillness, there was a strange peace in the air, a quiet acceptance that wrapped around her like a blanket. Lira spent her mornings by the riverbank, tending the small garden she and Kael had planted together. The flowers still bloomed, though their colors seemed muted. She spoke to him often, not expecting an answer. The herbs are growing well, she would say. The deer have returned. Her words carried across the water, gentle as prayer. Sometimes she thought she saw light dancing between the leaves, and she smiled, believing it was him listening. As the seasons turned again, Lira began to feel something stir inside her, a faint warmth, deep in her chest. It wasn't pain, though it carried sorrow's weight. It was familiar, like a pulse that wasn't entirely her own. One evening, while the sun bled through the trees, she stood by the river and looked down. In her reflection, she saw it, a faint glow beneath her skin, golden and soft. Her breath caught. "Kael?" she whispered. The light shimmered brighter, then settled. She touched her heart and felt tears rise. He hadn't truly gone. The light he returned to the forest had found its way into her, quiet and steady. It didn't burn, it lived the way he had wanted it to. For the first time since he left, she smiled without sadness. Years slipped by like drifting leaves. Lira grew older, her hair silvering like the river's surface. The world around her changed, but the forest remained faithful. Children from nearby villages began to wander close, drawn by the warmth of the place. They called it the Golden Grove, a place where sorrow turned to calm. Lira welcomed them, teaching them to listen to the forest's heartbeat, to treat the land as gently as one would a wounded soul. When they asked about the golden light that shimmered in the river at dusk, she told them a story of a demon who became human through love, and a woman who learned that grief could become grace. The children always listened with wide eyes, and when she spoke his name, the wind would stir, soft and kind. One evening, as twilight settled and the stars began to bloom, Lira sat by the river for the last time. Her hands rested on her lap, her eyes fixed on the glowing water. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I lived." The forest seemed to listen, and for a moment the air shimmered with light. She felt warmth on her cheek, like the brush of a wing. "I know," she murmured, smiling through her tears. Then she closed her eyes and leaned back against the grass. The forest sighed around her, peaceful and still. The wind carried the faintest echo of two voices, one human, one once demon, blending softly as the river glowed brighter, carrying their story beyond the trees. Long after Lira's passing, the forest remained unchanged. Seasons came and went, but the Golden Grove never lost its glow. Travelers would sometimes stumble upon it by chance, drawn by a strange calm that settled over them the moment they stepped beneath its trees. The air there always smelled of rain and earth, and the river never froze, not even in the deepest winter. Those who lingered claimed they could hear faint whispers in the wind, soft voices speaking of love, loss, and forgiveness. Most dismissed it as imagination. But the wise ones, the ones who listened with their hearts, knew it was something more. They said the forest remembered. And indeed it did. Every leaf, every ripple of water carried the memory of two souls who had once turned pain into peace. In the heart of the grove, a single tree stood taller than the rest. Its bark shimmered faintly with veins of gold, and its roots reached deep into the riverbank. Beneath its branches grew flowers that bloomed year-round, their petals glowing softly at dusk. The villagers built no shrine there, they didn't need to. The forest itself was the offering, alive with gratitude. Children would sometimes leave small gifts at the tree's roots. A stone, a feather, a handful of wild berries. They didn't know why they did it, only that it felt right. And when they left, their hearts felt lighter, as though some invisible sorrow had been lifted from them. The elders smiled and said, "That is the forest's blessing." But in truth, it was the echo of love that still lingered, patient and eternal. Over the years, stories of the Golden Grove spread far beyond the villages. Poets wrote of a light that healed the broken-hearted, and wanderers sought it, hoping to find answers to their grief. None ever met Kael or Lira, but many said they felt them, one in the warmth of sunlight through the leaves, the other in the gentle hum of the river. Some claimed that at dusk, when the world held its breath, a faint shadow could be seen among the trees, a figure with gray wings walking beside a woman with silver hair. They never spoke, never turned, only walked hand in hand until the mist swallowed them. Few believed such tales, yet those who had truly suffered often left the grove with tears and peace, as if something unseen had forgiven them. Centuries passed. The forest endured storms, fires, and the slow march of time, yet the Golden Grove never dimmed. Even when the world beyond changed, when roads and iron crept close, the grove remained untouched. Scholars came, trying to study its strange resilience, but they always left with more questions than answers. They could measure the soil, the light, the water, but not the feeling that lived there. Some called it magic. Others called it faith. But those who had walked through its heart, those who had listened closely to the whisper of wings and the song of the river, called it by another name: love. Because love, once given freely, does not die, it simply changes its shape and waits to be found again. And so, the legend endured. They said if you stand by the river at dawn, when mist still clings to the trees, and close your eyes, you might hear two voices, soft, steady, and kind. One will say, "You gave me a reason." The other will answer, "You taught me to live." Then the forest will breathe around you, and for one fleeting moment, you'll feel warmth on your cheek, like the brush of a wing. That is the forest's way of remembering the love of a demon who became human and a woman who turned sorrow into light. And as long as the river runs and the trees still whisper, their story will never end.